Renata Costa spends her working life tracing money. As a forensic accountant, her day-to-day involves hunting down the tiny, telltale inconsistencies that separate a real business from a fraudulent one. After being divorced for 2 years, she finally felt ready to put herself back out there and tentatively created a profile on a dating app. She soon matched with a man calling himself Julian Marsh. His profile was carefully calibrated. He listed his occupation as an international structural engineer working on offshore wind farms. The details he provided were balanced, plausible enough to feel authentic, but obscure enough to be difficult to verify. Over the next few weeks, Julian established a comforting rhythm. He sent good morning texts every day at exactly 7:15, remembered small personal details like her dislike of cilantro, and asked thoughtful follow-up questions. When they video called, the connection was always cut short by what he claimed was unreliable rig site internet, leaving her with only fleeting glimpses of a dim hotel room. These are calculated, mundane inputs designed to build intimacy over time. By establishing a sense of predictability and care, the person on the other end disarms the target's natural threat detection radar. By week 5, Julian encountered a problem. He explained with heavy apologies and obvious reluctance that his company's payroll system had suffered a processing error. He needed $3,000 to cover an immediate customs fee for shipping equipment, promising to pay it back within the week. Renata has sat through professional fraud prevention training outlining this exact scenario, yet she sent him the money. The request was engineered with such deliberate emotional discomfort that it successfully bypassed the analytical part of her brain. 11 days later, Julian transferred the $3,000 back into her account, accompanied by a brief, grateful message. This diagram illustrates the loss leader tactic. The scammer is actually the one investing. By asking for a small loan and returning the money, they purchase trust. This proves good faith, clearing the way for a second, vastly larger request to feel completely safe. 3 weeks after returning the funds, Julian presented an opportunity. He told Renata that a colleague had exclusive access to an auction for decommissioned maritime equipment, and he wanted her to partner with him on a $12,000 joint purchase. This diagram outlines the 3 pillars of an advance fee fraud pitch. You have a narrow window requiring quick action, a projected return promising to double your money, and a complicated chain of intermediaries that makes independent verification impossible. Hearing this structure woke up Renata's professional instincts. Instead of confronting him, she told Julian she needed a few days to move funds around and began treating her relationship like an active case file. The operator on the other end had followed their script flawlessly up to this point. Their error was deploying a textbook financial crime structure against a target who makes her living identifying those exact patterns. Framing her questions as a standard investor precaution, Renata asked for basic due diligence, starting with the name of the auction company. Julian provided the name, Meridian Offshore Salvage. She pulled up the company's website and ran the domain registration. It had been created just 4 months earlier, and the owner's identity was hidden behind a proxy privacy shield. This node map represents the site's hosting infrastructure. Renata recognized this server cluster from her corporate fraud training. It linked back to a known multi-country hub dedicated to investment scams. Running a reverse image search on the testimonials took minutes. The portraits were standard stock photography, identical to those on unrelated sites. These findings indicated a modular, corporate-style operation rather than a single individual. The precision of the digital assets and the technical overlap with known fraud clusters revealed an automated network designed for high-volume theft. Sitting alone in her home, the reality of the situation set in. Renata comprehended the scale of the criminal enterprise she was observing and the fact that she was viewing it directly from inside the trap. Confronting Julian immediately would be a strategic failure. Calling him out would only alert the larger syndicate, prompting them to delete a single disposable fake profile and move on to the next target. Renata decided to keep the line open. By maintaining the persona of the perfect target, she could collect the one thing a forensic investigator needs most: the specific wire transfer instructions, bank account numbers, and routing paths for stolen capital. The syndicate's psychological engineering was highly effective, but in successfully baiting the hook, they had inadvertently invited a professional investigator to watch their financial machinery function from the inside. Calculated, steady. Every message sent back to Julian Marsh looked like a woman slowly falling for a scam. But behind the screen, the dynamic had entirely flipped. Instead of cutting contact and letting the trail go cold, the strategy was containment. Keep the scammer on the line by doing the one thing guaranteed to hold his attention, promising him money. Over the next month, small, deliberate increments of money were sent, always paired with a plausible excuse for the delay on the rest. A holding period on a bank transfer, a pending question from a supposedly strict financial advisor. Every excuse was designed to keep him engaged and unsuspicious. Julian didn't know he was running his playbook on someone whose actual day job was scam prevention and fraud investigation. She knew exactly how these operations worked from the outside, and how to trace the digital footprint of the operation far more thoroughly than a typical victim could. By applying a professional containment protocol, the standard architecture of the con was inverted. The fraudster, believing he was reeling in a lucrative mark, had unknowingly become the subject of an active forensic investigation. With the targets safely contained in the messaging app, the real work began, where any legitimate fraud investigation starts: the money trail. Julian provided a bank account for the supposed investment. It was registered to a business name that was almost but perfectly offset from Meridian Offshore Salvage. This is a common technique in fraud cases, known as a buffer account. Looking at this payment flowchart, you can see how scammers complicate tracing. Instead of going straight to the public-facing fake company, funds are routed through an account one legal step removed before disappearing entirely. Tracing the digital footprint outward revealed the scale of the deception. The exact same stock photography used for fake customer testimonials appeared across 3 different company names, housed in visually identical website layouts. Cross-referencing the domain registration records showed that all 3 of these sites were registered within a tight 11-day window of each other, using the exact same privacy-shielded registrar. Finally, checking the IP addresses confirmed they were all hosted on the matching server cluster, locking the digital fingerprint together. These overlapping data points proved this was not an isolated criminal improvising alone. Julian was one identity operating within a heavily structured, templated fraud network, running several fronts simultaneously. Technical server data maps the infrastructure, but dismantling a network requires finding the human targets. The search moved to online forums and Facebook groups dedicated to romance scam awareness. The investigator searched for highly specific phrases pulled directly from Julian's messages: the offshore wind farm cover story, the customs fee framing, the precise line, "You're the only person who understands money." Within 2 days, 4 other women were found describing what were unmistakably the same scripts, sometimes word for word, but delivered by different fake names and different photos. Reaching out to these women required a delicate touch, approaching them with sensitive, professional inquiry rather than personal intrusion to gather corroborating facts. 3 of the women responded. When they compared notes, the structure of the operation became undeniable. Looking at this link analysis map, 3 completely different personas with different photos all point to a single central playbook of identical conversational scripts. The most critical connection was financial. Money from at least 2 supposedly distinct targets was directed to the exact same bank routing details. By combining their isolated accounts, they produced hard proof of a coordinated operation. This shared evidence effectively broke the forced isolation that scam networks rely on to keep their victims silent and their operations running. With the infrastructure mapped and the human nodes connected, the compiled evidence was ready for a calculated 3-pronged disclosure sequence. First, a comprehensive report was filed with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, packaging every technical fingerprint gathered alongside contact information for the corroborating victims. Second, parallel fraud reports were submitted directly to the victims' respective banks, attempting to intercept and freeze any recent or pending transfers. Third, a deliberately factual public warning was posted across scam awareness communities. It stripped away unverified personal details and laid out verifiable domain patterns, the reused stock photos, and direct quotes from his scripts. Within 4 days, the post spread rapidly. 6 additional women reached out, including one who recognized the exact messages she was receiving. She was intercepted just 3 days before sending her very first payment. 5 months later, an investigator called with an update. The meticulously documented pattern of overlapping financial infrastructure and shared scripts gave law enforcement exactly what individual cases usually lack. It was folded into a larger federal investigation, contributing directly to an indictment against several individuals running the overseas call center. The initial $3,000 sent as proof of good faith was never recovered. Like most funds in these cases, it was moved through untraceable chains long before the reports were even filed. But the operation was dismantled. Multiple women were saved from financial ruin, and a criminal network was exposed in a federal indictment. All because a man calling himself Julian Marsh made one fatal mistake in his targeting. He chose a mark whose entire profession was tracing the exact shadows he thought he was hiding in.